We are counting down the 10 most shocking outboard motors that fell victim to a perfect market storm. From barely used engines repossessed after just weeks on the water to entire shipments liquidated for pennies on the dollar, these models reveal a hidden industry collapse driven by overproduction, debt, and a tidal wave of forced sales no manufacturer wants you to see. Which engine marks the true origin of this meltdown? Let us begin with number 10. Honda's BF300 outboard looked like a success story on paper. In 2021 and 2022, Honda's Marine division reported full production lines, with investor updates boasting 95% capacity and shipment numbers that suggested surging demand. But the reality was hidden in the way revenue was counted. For the BF300 and many high-horsepower models, manufacturers booked revenue the moment engines left the factory, not when they reached an actual buyer. Dealers were locked into allocation contracts, forced to accept quotas or risk losing access to future models and parts. Shipments were celebrated as sales, yet hundreds of BF300s sat in crates, unsold, clogging up dealer lots and warehouses. The illusion of profit masked a growing inventory crisis. As demand softened in late 2023, these paper gains turned into real financial exposure. Engines that once looked like assets on the balance sheet became liabilities overnight, setting the stage for the flood of surplus units that would soon hit the market at any price. 20 Suzuki DF350s, shrink-wrapped and spotless, lined the floor of a Midwestern auction hall. Engines that once carried a $32,000 price tag were bundled together and hammered down as a single lot for less than $250,000, barely a third of their 2022 value. Auction records show exporter after exporter snapping up these bulk lots, shipping them overseas or flipping them into the gray market. Dealers, desperate to clear floor plan debt and stave off bank acceleration notices, dumped inventory at any price. The numbers are stark. In the first half of 2025, over 600 DF350s moved through U.S. auctions in 20-unit bundles, with winning bids averaging just 33% of MSRP. Some engines had never even left their crates. For exporters, it was a feeding frenzy. Buy low, ship fast, and never look back. For dealers and lenders, it was a financial reckoning. The fire sale carnage of the DF350 did not just gut resale values. It exposed how quickly an asset can become an anchor when the only buyers left are bargain hunters and brokers with shipping containers waiting at the docks. Rows of Yamaha F300 outboards, each with barely a scuff on the cowling, now sit silent on auction floors and in dealer back rooms. Engine control unit logs tell the story. Many of these engines have just 20, 30, or 60 hours, less time on the water than a single summer's worth of weekends. Certified mechanics have checked the hour meters and maintenance records. Nothing is wrong with these engines. No overheating, no blown seals, no missed services. Yet dozens were repossessed in a single quarter, hauled away from owners who simply could not keep up with loan payments as interest rates climbed and resale values collapsed. The F300 was never designed to end up here. It was built for long runs, years of salt and sun. Instead, it has become a casualty of paperwork and panic, a machine in perfect health, discarded while still in its prime. For every F300 left idling in a warehouse, there is a story of wasted potential, a reminder that in this crash, financial failure claimed what engineering never could. Sarah's Mercury dealership took delivery of a Verado 300 in the spring of 2024. The invoice showed $25,000, financed on a floor plan line. For the first 60 days, the bank charged interest only, about $200 a month at a 10% annual rate. But on day 91, the first curtailment hit. 10% of the principal, or $2,500, due immediately. Another 10% came due at 120 days and again at 180 days. Each payment drained cash that was not coming back in sales. Multiply this by 10, 20, or 50 engines, and the numbers become impossible. Over 9 months, the carrying cost on a single Verado 300 could top $2,000 in interest alone, plus $7,500 in curtailments. Unsold inventory was not just a headache, it was a time bomb. When Sarah missed a curtailment, the lender sent a demand letter. If the payment did not arrive in 10 days, the bank could declare the entire floor plan in default, repossess every engine, and liquidate at auction. For Sarah, and dozens of dealers like her, the only way out was to dump inventory fast, often at a loss that wiped out years of profit. The Verado 300 became a symbol of the squeeze, a high-horsepower engine built for open water, now stranded by debt math and lender rules that left no room for error. Cargo manifests show containers of Yamaha XTO 425 outboards leaving United States ports every month, bound for West Africa and Southeast Asia. Export brokers, some operating out of small offices near the docks, quietly buy up dealer overstock in bulk. These engines, once the pride of American marinas, now disappear by the dozen into shipping crates, never to power a local boat. The XTO 425's appeal overseas is simple: raw horsepower, proven reliability, and none of the emissions restrictions that cloud its future in the United States and Europe. Older technology, like the XTO's naturally aspirated V8, fetches a premium in markets where fuel quality is inconsistent and regulatory enforcement is lax. Shipping documents list thousands of units rerouted in 2025 alone, a hidden pipeline draining surplus from United States warehouses. Export brokers describe a brisk trade, buying at a fraction of manufacturers' suggested retail price, sometimes less than $10,000 per engine, and selling abroad for double or more. For United States dealers, these overseas buyers are a lifeline, offering cash when banks and domestic buyers have vanished. For manufacturers, the export flow is a quiet relief valve, moving excess inventory out of sight and off the books. But every container that leaves is another reminder. These engines aren't being destroyed or recycled. They're simply vanishing from the market that once prized them, casualties of a crash that rewrote the rules of global supply and demand. Number 5. Evinrude G2 300, premature scrap heap. At the edge of a salvage yard, a row of G2 300 engines sits behind a chain-link fence, their bright cowls faded by sun and neglect. These engines, once the pride of innovation, are now waiting for destruction, not because they failed, but because the market and regulations left them stranded. After BRP shuttered Evinrude's outboard division in 2020, support for the G2 line vanished. Dealers and owners found themselves holding engines that could not be sold, registered, or even exported in many regions. Local emissions rules, combined with the lack of manufacturer certification, pushed these engines into a bureaucratic dead end. According to intake logs reviewed by regulators, salvage yards saw a spike in orphaned 2 units, with some facilities reporting that nearly a third of the Evinrudes they received were destroyed outright, rather than resold or parted out. Recycling insiders describe a mounting crisis. The G2's complex electronics and oil reservoirs make them expensive to process, while hazardous waste slips through unregulated channels. Environmental officials warn that the real cost of this crash is not just financial. Each scrapped engine means gallons of lubricants, heavy metals, and plastics entering the waste stream, an ecological bill that will linger long after the market recovers. The story of the G2 300 ends, not with a sale, but with a silent trip to the shredder, a casualty of policy and profit, with consequences no one in the industry wants to discuss. A Mercury Racing 400, once the crown jewel of performance boating, now sits on the auction block with a starting bid that barely covers shipping. Public auction records from May 2025 show these engines, stickered at $25,000 just a year before, fallen under the gavel for as little as $7,300. One auction held in Georgia listed a 2024 Racing 400 with 19 hours on the meter. The hammer dropped at $8,200. The buyer was an export broker who paid less than a third of last year's retail. Another unit, purchased new for a high-performance fishing rig, was repossessed after the owner fell behind on payments. The dealer, underwater on the floor plan loan, surrendered the engine to the bank. It was resold at a loss so steep, the dealer has negative equity on that single motor topped $12,000. Stories of owners walking away from loans, dealers dumping inventory to cover curtailments, and brokers quietly flipping engines for cash have become routine. By summer, the Racing 400's price collapse was no longer an outlier. The market did not just correct, it imploded. Engines that once turned heads at the docks now sell for pennies, each sale a reminder of how quickly value can vanish when supply floods the system and buyers disappear. Suzuki's DF300 didn't flood dealer lots by accident. Internal memos and whistleblower testimony reveal a designed system to force excess inventory downstream, no matter the real demand. Dealers across the Midwest and Gulf states received calls from regional reps telling them to order more DF300s now or lose their shot at next year's V8 allocations. The message was blunt: take the quota or forfeit access to the most profitable models and factory rebates. One dealer described the pressure in a lawsuit filed in early 2024. They said they were told, if you do not order 15 DF300s this quarter, you are off the list for DF350s next spring. The numbers did not add up. Showrooms were already packed, and local sales had slowed to a trickle, but declining a shipment meant risking the entire dealership's future. The rebate structure turned into a trap. Hit the quota, and the manufacturer sent a check sometimes worth $1,500 per engine. Missed the quota, and not only did the rebate vanish, but penalties kicked in. Dealers scrambled to move engines any way they could, even at a loss. By the end of 2024, Suzuki's own allocation tracker showed hundreds of DF300s stacked in regional warehouses, waiting for buyers who never materialized. Whistleblowers allege managers were instructed to keep pushing inventory, regardless of local sales data, just to meet corporate shipment targets. This manufactured oversupply did not just hurt a handful of dealers. It created a tidal wave of surplus DF300s, setting the stage for the auction rows and liquidation scenes that would soon define the market's collapse. The quota trap was not a hidden flaw, it was a deliberate strategy, with consequences rippling far beyond the showroom floor. On the outskirts of an industrial park, the auction house doors rolled open to reveal a sight that defied belief. Hundreds of outboard engines, shrink-wrapped and stacked in endless rows, each one gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. These were not battered trade-ins or salvage yard discards. The labels still clung to the crates: Yamaha, Mercury, Suzuki, most stamped with model years of less than 12 months old. An employee, voiced low, described the chaos of a recent weekend. 500 engines sold in a single event, the kind of volume that would have supplied a region for an entire season, now gone in 48 hours. The lot sheet read like an inventory for a new dealership, not a liquidation. V6 and V8 engines, almost all new in crate, were bundled in lots of 20, 30, even 50 at a time. Some buyers were exporters, others were brokers, but few were local. The auctioneer's gavel fell again and again, each hammer blow erasing another line of red ink from a dealer's balance sheet. The employee pointed to a row that stretched the length of the warehouse, every engine untouched, never registered, never run. By Monday morning, what remained looked like gravestones. silent and identical, waiting for the next round of bidders. For those inside the industry, there was no denying the reality anymore. The fire sale was not a rumor or an isolated event. It was happening at scale, in plain sight, and the proof sat shrink-wrapped and unsold, waiting for anyone willing to look past the marketing gloss. The liquidation wave had become impossible to ignore, and the evidence was right there, stacked row on row. Engines that should have been on the water, now reduced to auction lots and spreadsheet losses. Factory gates opened before sunrise. Inside, the lines never stopped moving. Between 2020 and 2023, outboard plants across the United States, Japan, and Europe ran at more than 95% capacity, churning out V6 and V8 engines around the clock. Investor reports from Mercury, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Honda all told the same story. Record capital spending, new automation, and hiring sprees were fueled by forecasts of endless demand. The numbers were staggering. Production targets soared, and by 2025, more than 2 million outboards sat beyond what the market could absorb. The logic was simple on paper. Pandemic lockdowns had driven families outdoors, pushing boat sales up by over 30% in a single year. Manufacturers, betting this wave would never break, expanded lines and locked in supplier contracts for years ahead. Boardrooms approved new buildings, robots, and shifts, all justified by models that projected 7% growth year after year. Every engine that left the factory counted as revenue, even if it only moved from one warehouse to another. Shipments were celebrated as sales, and the illusion of a booming market became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then the orders stopped coming. By late 2023, the cracks were impossible to ignore. Dealers were buried in inventory, but the factories kept going, bound by quotas and contracts that could not be unwound overnight. Engines piled up in distribution centers, dealer lots, and auction houses. Warehouse managers reported entire sections filled with new in crate V6 and V8 engines that never touched the water. Internal memos warned of ballooning storage costs and the growing risk of negative equity on unsold stock. Yet production lines, automated and amortized, were too costly to idle. The system was locked in, unable to pivot as demand collapsed. The flood was not a trickle but a tidal wave. 2 million surplus engines, enough to supply the United States for years, hit the market within months. Prices cratered. Engines that once sold for $25,000 now struggled to fetch $8,000 at auction. Bulk lots of 20, 30, even 50 units changed hands for pennies on the dollar. Exporters and brokers circled like sharks, scooping up inventory that manufacturers and dealers could no longer afford to hold. The glut triggered every downstream collapse, dealer bankruptcies, repossessions, environmental headaches, and a resale market in free fall. No single engine or brand caused the crash. The entire high-horsepower cohort, built on pandemic optimism and turbocharged by unchecked production, became a victim of its own scale. The evidence is in the numbers. 2 million excess outboards, factories that ran non-stop, and a market that drowned in its own supply. This is how the crash unfolded, not as a trick of accounting or a failure of engineering, but as a system pushed far beyond its limits, leaving a trail of shrink-wrapped engines and erased fortunes in its wake. Across all 10 outboards, one undeniable pattern emerges. Financial engineering, more than technology or demand, now dictates the fate of entire fleets. Engines built for adventure became collateral in a crisis few predicted. This crash is not just about low prices. It is a warning that when speculation outpaces reality, even the strongest industries can unravel overnight. In boating's new era, the real risk is invisible until it is everywhere.